Okay, let's take a look at arrays, and we're going to figure out how to declare an array, how to initialize an array, and we've got this third step that we got to do, which is called create an array. And basically, let's start by talking about what an array is. An array is when you've got a whole bunch of the same thing and you want to give it a name. So suppose I've got 10 different numbers and I'll give it one identifier, I'll call it my numbers, and then that represents all of those numbers. Let's start by taking a look at how to create an array of integers. And before we create an array of integers, let's just create one integer so that we know how that's done. If you'll remember, to create one integer, I might say int my int, and then that is how we declare an integer. Now there's a space in RAM called my int that is an integer. And then to initialize this, I say my int equals, and I'd give it some kind of number like this. Now we've got the integer my int declared and initialized. Now we can use it, so I'm going to go ahead and do a system out print line, and I'm going to print out my int equals, and I should make this a literal, then concatenate my variable name, my int. Okay, so if I was to run this out, it would print out basically my int equals 10. Now with an array, we've got a whole bunch of numbers that we're going to give the same name. So I'm going to create an array called my integers with an S on the end of it. And we start by declaring it, int, but to make sure that the compiler knows it's an array of integers, we put regular brackets at the end of the base type. So in this case, I'm dealing with integers, and so I'm going to put some brackets at the end of those, then a space, my ints. So I'm putting the S on the end. So that's how we declare an integer. That's very simple, and it's very similar to how we declared a common integer. So now the next step, though, is a little bit different. What we need to do is we need to create the array just like we would construct an object. And so I'm going to say my ints equals new, and this is where it's a little bit different. We say int, but instead of putting parentheses, we put brackets. And then we have to specify within the brackets the number of integers we want our array to have. So here I'm going to have an array that's got 3 integers in it. And so I do it just like I'm constructing it, int equals new int. Now notice that I could have put this all on the same line, but just to keep things clear, I'm going to put it on 2 lines. All right, so now that I've created this, I've got to now go ahead and initialize all the values. And I've got 3 of them. And so I'm going to start by initializing my first value. And I do that by typing in the name of the array, which is my ints. In fact, it should be ints like that. The only difference is I've got to put in the element index number. So when we have a bunch of arrays, each array member is called an element of that array, and they're all indexed based on a number, and the index starts at 0. So my first element is indexed 0. So I'm going to say my ints element 0 equals, and I'll just give it some kind of number. I'm going to give it 26. And then I've got 2 more elements to initialize because I've got 3 elements in my array. So I'm going to say my ints element 1 is going to equal 55, just picking random numbers. And then my ints element index 2 equals 90. Okay, so we created an array of integers with 3 elements, and then when we talk about those, we have to start at 0 and go 0, 1, 2. Notice that we don't go to 3 because we started at 0. That's one of the confusing things about arrays. Okay, now that I've got that, I can go ahead and print out the values of those. So I'm just going to copy my system out print line here that I had up here, put it down here, and I'm going to change it to first int equals, and then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to put the name of my array and the index number. So I'm going to put my ints with an S, put the brackets, and put element 0. So now that's the first integer is element 0. I'll go ahead and copy that line, and I'll do the same thing. I'm going to have the second int equals, and then my ints, but it'll be element 2. I'm sorry, 1. And then I'll have the third integer, and that's going to be my index number 2 on that one. So since we're starting at 0, we always have to have this problem where the first one is 0 and the second one is 1 and so on. It's confusing. Okay, I'll go ahead and compile this. Looks like it compiled with no problems. And I'll go ahead and run it. So it says my int is 10, my first element is 50, my second element is, well, this is the wrong, this has got some stuff left over from the last time I ran it, so I'll go ahead and run it again. That's right, my int is 10, first int 26, second int is 56, third is 90, and that's exactly what we would expect it to do. So again, we have declared an array by putting the brackets at the end of it. Often with arrays we give an S at the end of the identifier. And then we created the array, so that's an extra step. My ints equals new int. And then we had to initialize every single member of that array. Often we have to do this in a loop, but right here we've only got 3 of them, so it's pretty easy. And there are some shortcuts, but this is the basics of how to do it. And now that we've initialized every array member, we can start using them and accessing them. So here I printed out array number 1, or the first array, which is index 0, and so on. All right.